The Echoes of Blackwood Manor. The night was still as Hannah pulled up to the gates of Blackwood Manor, her headlights barely piercing the thick fog that clung to the iron bars. The old mansion had been abandoned for decades, its history buried beneath layers of dust, superstition, and shadowy rumors. But tonight, Hannah was determined to uncover the truth. As a historian and paranormal investigator, she had spent years researching haunted places, but Blackwood Manor was different. The stories whispered of a family cursed by madness, of echoes from the past that still haunted the halls. Her colleagues had warned her against coming here alone, but she couldn't resist the allure. This was her chance to capture evidence, if the stories were true. Pushing open the rusty gates, she drove up the overgrown driveway, her car bouncing over the cracked stones. The manor loomed ahead, its once grand facade now cracked and crumbling, with ivy crawling up the sides like fingers of decay. Hannah parked the car, grabbed her gear, and stood for a moment, staring up at the massive building. A chill ran down her spine, but she shook it off and made her way to the door. It groaned loudly as she pushed it open, the sound echoing through the hollow entryway. Dust filled the air, disturbed by her presence. Her flashlight beam swept across the darkened space, revealing rotting furniture, peeling wallpaper, and paintings that stared down from the walls with lifeless eyes. Hannah set up her camera and audio equipment, ready to capture any signs of paranormal activity. She had barely turned on her recorder when a faint sound drifted through the air, a soft, distant humming. It seemed to come from deep within the house. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. That wasn't possible, she thought. The place was supposed to be deserted. She grabbed her flashlight and followed the sound, her footsteps soft against the creaking floorboards. The humming grew louder as she moved deeper into the manor. It led her through the grand, decaying ballroom, with its once ornate chandelier hanging by a thread, and into a long hallway lined with closed doors. The walls here were covered in old family portraits, the faces of the Blackwood family members staring at her with cold, dead eyes. The sound drew her to the last door on the right. Her hand trembled as she reached for the knob, but she forced herself to turn it. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in moonlight. It was a child's bedroom, untouched by time. Toys lay scattered across the floor, and a small bed with a canopy stood against the wall. But it was the rocking chair in the corner that caught her attention. It was moving, slowly, back and forth, as if someone had just been sitting in it. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. The humming had stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. She stepped into the room, her flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. As she moved closer to the chair, she noticed something chilling. On the dusty floor beside it were the faint impressions of small, childlike footprints, leading from the bed to the chair and back again. Suddenly, the door behind her slammed shut with a deafening bang. She spun around, her flashlight flickering. Her pulse raced as she grabbed the doorknob and yanked, but it wouldn't budge. She was locked in. Panic set in, but she forced herself to stay calm. Taking a deep breath, she turned back to the room and froze. A figure stood in front of the bed, a small girl, no more than 6 or 7 years old. Her skin was pale as moonlight, her hair dark and tangled. She wore a tattered nightgown, and her eyes were black, hollow voids. The girl stared at Hannah, unmoving, her face expressionless. Hannah's voice caught in her throat. She had come here to find evidence of the supernatural, but now that she was face to face with it, she was paralyzed with fear. She tried to speak, to ask the girl who she was, but the words wouldn't come. The girl tilted her head slightly, as if studying Hannah, and then, In a voice that sounded like it came from far away, she whispered, "They're coming." The room suddenly grew ice cold. Hannah's breath fogged in front of her, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift and writhe. The girl turned her head toward the window, and Hannah followed her gaze. Outside, through the fog, she could see figures moving, shapes, indistinct but growing closer. They drifted toward the manor like phantoms, their faces obscured by the mist. Hannah's heart pounded in her chest. She backed away from the window, her eyes darting between the girl and the approaching figures. The child's black eyes locked onto her once more. "You can't leave," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising wind outside. "They won't let you." As she spoke, the door behind Hannah rattled violently, as if something on the other side was trying to get in. She stumbled back, her mind racing. The figures outside were now at the edge of the manor, and she could see them more clearly. They were the Blackwood family. The same faces from the portraits in the hallway, their eyes hollow, their bodies thin and decayed. They stood motionless, staring up at the window with expressions of hunger. A sudden, deafening crash came from the hallway, followed by heavy footsteps. Whatever had been outside was now inside. The girl's hollow gaze never left Hannah's as she spoke again, her voice now more urgent. "They're here." The temperature in the room plummeted, and the walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Hannah's skin prickled with terror. She had to get out. Desperately, she yanked at the door again, and this time it flew open. She bolted into the hallway, her flashlight casting wild beams of light as she ran. The house was alive with noise, whispers, footsteps, the distant creaking of floorboards. As she sprinted down the hall, the portraits seemed to watch her, their eyes following her every move. The air was thick, oppressive, as though the house itself was closing in on her. She reached the grand staircase, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but when she looked down, her heart sank. The figures from the fog were now inside the foyer, their hollow eyes fixed on her. The Blackwood family, their once wealthy clothes now tattered and stained, stood motionless, blocking her path to the front door. Hannah backed away, her mind reeling. There was no way out. She could hear the footsteps behind her. Whatever had been chasing her was closing in. Panic surged through her. She turned and ran up the stairs, her legs burning with the effort. She had no plan, no idea where to go. She just knew she had to keep moving. At the top of the stairs, she darted into a narrow hallway and slammed the door behind her. Her flashlight flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to quiet her breathing, trying to think. Then, from the shadows, came the girl's voice again. This time it was closer, whispering in her ear. "You'll stay with us, forever." Hannah screamed and bolted from the wall, stumbling blindly in the dark. Her hands scraped against the rough wallpaper as she ran, but there was nowhere to go. The air was suffocating, filled with the sound of footsteps and whispers. She could feel the presence of the Blackwoods closing in, their hollow eyes watching her every move. She rounded a corner and found herself in the ballroom again. The chandelier above her swung wildly, casting eerie shadows across the room. The Blackwood family stood at the edges of the room, their hollow gazes fixed on her, and in the center, the girl stood, waiting. Hannah fell to her knees, her body shaking with terror. She couldn't escape, she was trapped. The girl stepped forward, her black eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor," she whispered, her voice cold and final. you'll never leave." And as the shadows closed in, Hannah's scream echoed through the manor, blending with the whispers of the past. One more voice added to the haunting chorus that would forever fill the halls of Blackwood Manor.